Welcome to Weather Extra. Thanks for joining us. I'm meteorologist Jillian Grace. Another powerful storm system slammed into the state of California last week, bringing another round of heavy rain, snow, and even hurricane force winds. We start Weather Extra by bringing in meteorologist Sean Bellafiore, who breaks down the storm's dynamics. Sean.
California has been absolutely getting walloped by storm systems over the past couple of months, and this past week was no exception. Another very strong storm system moving in, anywhere from 2 to 4 inches of rain around the Bay Area, and also another 2 to 4 inches around Los Angeles too. Of course, snow in higher elevations, but this storm system brought a little something different. We're going to take a look under the rain hood and talk about the flooding and hail, and of course the wind gust damage reports that we saw Tuesday into Wednesday with this storm system. I want to point out a couple of different locations, including Santa Clarita north of Los Angeles, 71-mile-per-hour wind gusts. We also saw very close to Chula Vista, which is south of San Diego, 52-mile-per-hour wind gusts. And up near the Bay Area, reports of 70 to 80-mile-per-hour wind gusts were seen with this storm system. As we take a look at satellite radar, I want to point out a couple of things. Of course, the rain and the snow in the higher elevation, but take a look at what's going on near San Francisco. Kind of looks a little bit like a hurricane, doesn't it? You'd be kind of half right. Now, what happened with this storm system is something called warm seclusion. This is your basic standard everyday area of low pressure. We have the warm front with warm air ahead of a cold front, and of course cold air on the backside of that system. Now, what can happen with these systems over the open ocean waters of the Pacific is something called a frontal breakage. What that means is the cold front weakens a little bit and it breaks, allows for the warmer air that's surging into this area of low pressure to spill onto the cold side of the system. And with enough time, as the cyclone matures, what happens is the warm air just completely wraps around the center of circulation, becoming a warm core low. That is what a hurricane is, a warm core low. And no, this was not a hurricane, but it did produce hurricane force wind gusts. And you can see on satellite and radar, of course, a little bit of a spin there, what looks to be some eye features. That is the warm air surrounding the area of low pressure. But there's also two areas of low pressure, one right here, that's the main one, and then this one right here near San Jose. What happens when you have two areas of low pressure next to each other? Well, it's something called the Fujiwara effect. When those two nearby lows, they kind of dance around their common center and they either split apart or they merge. And in this case, they merged just near and north of San Francisco. Reporting in the studio, Sean Bellafiore, KWTX News 10.
And just as you heard from Sean, California dealt with another week of unsettled, dangerous weather, and there's some crazy images coming out of the state as that storm system moved away. Let's take a look. Heavy rain fell on top of an already saturated soil and managed to cause numerous reports of flash flooding and landslides across the Golden State. Severe thunderstorms rolled through the southern portions of California. 2 million people were under a severe thunderstorm warning in San Diego on Tuesday. Sean showed us that several inches of rain fell from the San Francisco Bay down into LA and San Diego. Millions were under flood watches. Some evacuations were ordered as water levels in area rivers rose out of their banks. Multiple sinkholes were also reported last week. And while heavy rain was falling in the lower elevations, heavy snow was dumping across the Sierra Nevada mountain range, where some areas have already seen more than 50 feet of snow this year. Winter weather advisories and winter storm warnings were in effect last week as an additional half foot or more of snow accumulated. So far this year, Lake Tahoe, California has seen 677 inches or 56.4 feet of snow. So much snow has fallen this year that 2 out of the 10 most snowiest months on record have been in 2023. As of last week, Lake Tahoe's 2022 and 23 winter season is now the second snowiest on record, coming behind the 1982 and 83 season where 812 inches fell. Powerful wind gusts brought down trees across the state, knocked out power to 250,000 residents, and even killed 2 people as ferocious wind gusts caused trees to fall on their cars. Hurricane-force winds were even reported in California. In Oakland, across the bay, a wind gust of 74 miles per hour was recorded. Strong winds gusting as high as 65 miles per hour were reported in San Francisco, blowing out windows and skyscrapers in the downtown financial district, and blew over vehicles on the Bay Bridge this past Tuesday. Those strong winds also caused large waves to crash along the seawall in the Bay Area as well. The powerful storm system that left a destructive path across California also brought heavy flooding rains and snowy conditions into parts of Nevada and Arizona last week. And look at this rare sighting of a tornado hitting near Los Angeles on Wednesday, a first for California in 40 years. The National Weather Service confirms the tornado was an EF1 with estimated peak winds of 110 miles per hour. Several buildings were damaged with parts of their roofs torn off, and at least 2 people were injured. Those storms systems that have been impacting California this year have left numerous destructive paths across the entire state. But those storms are also bringing back those beautiful spring colors. Christina Kazurkan has more on the signs that California is in for a wildflower super bloom this year. Take a look.
Following several dry, drought-stricken years, Mother Nature gifted California with an unusually wet, rainy season. The impact of the abundance of rain is on full display at the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, with this year looking different than previous years.
This year we're already up to 39 inches of rain, which was about 3 times what we had last year.
While California's vibrant orange poppy is thriving, the opposite is true for parts of the meadow. The surplus of moisture and the consistent back-to-back storms have overwhelmed parts of the garden.
All the plants that are in this meadow are adapted to deal with the drought conditions that we normally have, and so many of them just rotted right out.
Otherwise healthy trees have fallen due to the overly saturated soil and the damaging gusty winds that often accompany the rain.
The wood's really healthy, there's no rot to it. The reason it fell over is that the soil couldn't hold it anymore.
If you visited the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden in years past, you'll notice things look a little different this year. Another difference, the raging water at the creek.
There are a lot of plants are going to be blooming this year that oftentimes don't have enough water to be able to do it, that maybe only every few years are able to bloom.
The possibility of a super bloom is at the forefront of most minds as we transition into spring, but there are specific components necessary before our eyes can relish in the spectacle.
There's a sort of recipe to what causes a super bloom, and that starts usually with drought, which is kind of counterintuitive.
There certainly hasn't been a shortage of drought conditions here, allowing the seed bank to fill and eventually get flushed with rainwater.
And extended rain also allows those plants to get big enough that the show can be atypically spectacular.
But there's still some skepticism.
We had a little bit of a gap between December and January, and some plants got tricked and germinated and flowered when they were pretty small. So I think that even if it doesn't reach full super bloom, which is still possible, we should have a really nice show across the Central Coast.
Residents may be fatigued from the wet weather, but the likelihood of a super bloom is on the horizon. In Santa Barbara, I'm News Channel weather anchor Krista Kirkjian.
And signs that spring has sprung can be found on the East Coast as well. The cherry blossom trees in Washington, D.C. are in their full bloom. The National Park Service announced the peak bloom was for the trees was actually this past Wednesday into this weekend. The cherry blossom trees were given as a gift from the mayor of Tokyo 111 years ago, and they attract over 1 million visitors to the Washington, D.C. area this time of the year. And one way that we can tell that spring has sprung right here in Central Texas is by all the bluebonnets that are popping up. We asked you at home to send us some of your favorite bluebonnet photos, and there were so many to choose from, but check some of these out. Look at this stunning image captured by Catherine of a field of bluebonnets in Marble Falls. And this close-up shot of a bluebonnet taken by Lauren Downey from Waco. You could see the different shades of blue and purple in this shot. And look at this stunning view of a field of bluebonnets looking almost like a sea of blue. This shot was taken by Margaret Campbell near Reynolds Creek. And the City of Hewitt's Police Department shared this photo with us, one of their canine officers posing in a field of bluebonnets. And here at KWTX, we currently have a Bluebonnet photo contest being put on by Fitzgerald's Landscape. You can scan the QR code right there on your screen to submit your best Bluebonnet photos. You could win a 10-inch iPad, so get outside and snap away. We have some beautiful Bluebonnets all over Central Texas. Weather Extra will be right back after the break. Welcome back to Weather Extra. The high seas and its marine life saw a victory earlier this month as United Nations diplomats from nearly 200 nations agreed on a treaty that protects large parts of the Earth's ocean. CBS's Ian Lee has this report from London.
The ship has reached the shore.
A historic deal made on land aims to better protect the world's oceans.
I mean, this is huge. This is really, I think, a keystone agreement if we're going to try and protect 30% of the ocean.
There's a lot at stake.
More than a decade of debate over funding and fishing rights had stalled the landmark treaty at the UN. As the high seas remained vulnerable to chemical and plastic pollution, overfishing, and other threats.
There is a lot of destruction going on in the world's oceans. 90% of the big fish are gone. This is why we need to start urgently putting something back.
The high seas are areas beyond any country's control, making up almost half of the Earth's surface.
Right now, only 1% of the high seas is protected within a marine reserve, and we need to get to 30% by 2030.
Once countries formally adopt the agreement, work can begin to protect the deep blue sea. Ian Lee, CBS News.
And a 5,000-mile-wide stretch of stinky seaweed has already hit Barbados and is threatening its ecosystem and tourism industry. Scientists are worried about the environmental and health impact as the seaweed heads towards Florida. CNN's Leila Santiago has more on the massive bloom of seaweed from Key West.
It's thick in the summertime, builds up and smells terrible.
Joe Kaplan captured these images about a week ago. Massive amounts of seaweed washing up at Smathers Beach, a beach he knows well because he walks it several times a week.
This is about 5,000 miles long.
Professor Schauman Hu is one of the leading experts on what many have referred to as a massive blob of seaweed heading to Florida's coast.
Fair to call it a blob?
Nope.
No, we can't call it a blob. Okay.
I would never call that a blob.
Okay, why?
Because it's not.
Satellite images, he says, show it's not one massive body of seaweed, rather a bunch of patchy clumps traveling from West Africa. It's called the Atlantic Sargassum Belt and is considered a natural phenomenon. Right now, it's twice the width of the U.S., carrying 6 million tons of seaweed and headed to the East Coast.
In June of this year, it may turn into 20 million tons.
So let me get this straight. This, what we're seeing the last month, is 6 million tons, and it's going to get bigger.
Yes, there's no way to stop that. This is nature, just like no one can stop a hurricane.
Should we be worried about that?
Nope.
Why?
Reason is the sargassum is not toxic.
But it smells pretty bad, and it's a nuisance for those trying to keep beaches clean to attract tourists. Just a few years ago, here's what it looked like in Mexico. Officials in Monroe County, which includes the Florida Keys, have set aside more than $200,000 to clean and remove sargassum from its beaches.
Seaweed is a mixed blessing. We need it. Seaweed is a nursery for all these large pelagic fish. The negative side to that seaweed is if it comes in the concentrations that are believed we're going to see, our fishing grounds are going to be completely covered with it. There's almost no point to fishing because we're going to be spending the entire day cleaning weed off our lines.
And as the sargassum belt heads toward Florida, another natural phenomenon is already hitting its beaches on the West Coast. Red tide. It can be toxic, kill fish, and cause respiratory issues. This year's red tide concerns were enough to cancel at least one major event here in Indian Rocks, where one family visiting told us,
as soon as my son and my husband and I got out of our car, we all started coughing.
But for spring breakers like this group from Iowa, the concerns of massive amounts of seaweed or red tide were not enough to change vacation plans.
I would rather it be red tide than raining every day.
Tourists, noting friends back home,
they'd be pretty jealous, regardless of having a little bit of the red tide symptoms. They'd be pretty jealous that we're here and they're not.
Because the pristine beaches of the Sunshine State are hard to resist for many, despite what may be looming offshore.
Again, this could be a stinky situation as summer's right around the corner and people are starting to make those summer vacation plans. Experts say this year's mass could be the largest on record, spanning from the coast of Africa to the Gulf of Mexico. They're already calling it catastrophic, the problems there for the tourism in the Caribbean region. Not only is it expensive, costing millions to remove it from beaches, it can also be hazardous to human health. That's because it emits a toxic gas that can cause respiratory problems. Researchers say the amount of seaweed can shift from each year depending on ecological factors. Right, coming up next on Weather Extra is this week's Degrees of Science. So stay tuned for that interview. It's right after the break.
We've got a major event going on across the state of Texas, particularly here in Central Texas, as we head into April of 2024. And we've got Dr. Barbara Endel here with Baylor University. So how cool of an event is this Eclipse going to be for Central Texas next April?
It's going to be very, very cool. And it is one of the unique experiences that we have. I'm usually saying that watching a total solar eclipse is a visceral experience because you know it's coming, but when you get to see the diamond ring, it's fabulous. It's just a very, very unique experience.
Yes, so a few years ago we had the eclipse that went across the U.S., but here in Central Texas we just got a partial. So Central Texans have seen some, but you went all the way to, what, Idaho, is that right,
yes,
to see it? So how, just when it goes into the total eclipse, how much does stuff change and how different does it look?
Yeah, nature gets a lot confused when the total solar eclipse happens. Babies cry. You're going to hear cicadas because the nature understands it's becoming nighttime. I wouldn't cross the street to watch a 50% or partial eclipse, but we should travel around the world to watch a total solar eclipse. It's a really unique experience, and it is beautiful.
And we couldn't schedule that in a month that I'm not worried about rain, because that's what April, as meteorologists, I'm worried that we're going to have. But we'll have.
We're praying for good weather.
Yes, I know. How much of an influx are we expecting into this area of people to see that?
Well, we at Baylor University, we partner with the City of Waco, with Lowell Observatory, and also with the Discovery Channel. So we are expecting something like 50,000 at least. Our event will be able to host about 20 to 30,000 attendees. So we've been planning very cool activities for STEM activities for the families to come and watch the eclipse. Not only just watch the eclipse, but to understand what's going to happen with everything. So we're going to have some experiments, some astronomers giving pop-up talks for that, a ton of telescopes so people can safely watch them. It's going to be in the touchdown alley, basically outside the stadium. Obviously, the stadium kind of blocks because have you watched the total solar eclipse?
I have not seen a total one, no. I've seen the partial, but I've never got to enjoy and that's something I'm looking forward to seeing.
So one of the cool things is that when the moon covers the sun, we're gonna see a 360-degree sunset kind of thing. And the colors of the sky, it's like it's not dark blue, or it becomes a little darker, but it's a different shade than the sunset.
Oh, okay.
So it's
just a once in a lifetime kind of thing, right?
Yes, but it is a 360-degree sunset.
So you want to get somewhere where you can see all around.
Exactly. So the stadium, actually inside the stadium, would block our view a little bit. Okay. So it was not great.
We start talking about a solar eclipse. We've got the moon rotating all the time around, and we're between us and the sun. What all has to line up just right for a solar eclipse to occur?
So if the moon and the Earth were perfectly aligned with the path of the sun, we would see eclipses every month, because every month the new moon would basically go in front and block some part of the sun. But there is a 5-degree inclination angle, just enough. 5 degrees is almost nothing. We can barely tell, and that is what makes the eclipse so much more special. As a matter of fact, when we have the total solar eclipse on the same month, we'll be able to see probably a lunar eclipse, because then the bodies will be already perfectly aligned. So 14 days later, we'll be able to see a lunar eclipse.
So the other thing that's really cool is how the moon has to be how lucky we are that our moon is in the right size and the right spot to be able to make that lunar eclipse or solar eclipse.
Yeah, it's an amazing coincidence that the angular size of the moon is exactly the same of the angular size of the sun.
I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. I mean, I'm super excited. So April 9th? 8th. Yeah, don't go April 9th. You'll be mad.
8 at 1:38.
And how long will the eclipse last? I mean, I know it's a gradual thing, but when does it start? When does it end? And how long do we get the total part of it?
The totality for us, we are very close to the center of the path of totality. So we're going to see the longest, which is about a little over 4 minutes.
To hear more about this historic event coming our way in a little more than a year, scan the QR code on your screen to watch on YouTube or go to kwtx.com/degrees of science. Welcome back to Weather Extra. Let's head to outer space and dive into some of the major stories from this past week. The first story is on NASA and how the space program is ending a 15-year mission studying clouds at the edge of space due to battery issues. The spacecraft AIM, which stands for Aeronomy of Ice in the Mesosphere, is no longer supporting operations. AIM's batteries began declining in 2019, but it still remained able to send a significant amount of data. However, the continuing decline in battery power has now left it unable to receive commands or collect data. AIM actually completed its original mission back in 2009, but it was able to extend operations for several more years. NASA will monitor the spacecraft in the event that it is actually able to reboot and send a signal. And Japan's space agency detected organic molecules in an asteroid near Earth. Researchers collected samples from 2 locations on the carbon-rich diamond-shaped asteroid called Ryugu. Scientists found uracil, one of the building blocks of RNA, and vitamin B3, or niacin, which is a cofactor for metabolism in living organisms. Researchers previously detected other molecules in the asteroid sample. Uracil and niacin have also been found in meteorites that landed on Earth. These findings are in line with the theory that the building blocks of life originated in space and were delivered to Earth billions of years ago by meteors. So I think that's pretty cool stuff there. All right, thanks for tuning into this week's Weather Extra. We will be back again next weekend for another half hour of weather and science. Until then, have a great week and good night.